Well, welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, get a friend to choose a Doctor Who story, then to choose their favourite things about it, and whilst watching, I have to guess what those favourite things are.
Hello, my name is Ian Winterton. I'm a playwright and writer and journalist, and in the world of Doctor Who, I'm currently writing comic books for Cutaway Comics, Demons of Eden, which is out now as a backup strip with the Omega comic by Mark Griffiths, and I've also got a graphic novel coming called Affirmative, which might feature a bit of K9, and I've also got other things from Cutaway that I can't talk about, but they're very exciting. So, onto the podcast, and I am picking The Power of Kroll from 1978. And I was 6 when this came out, so it's absolutely seared into my brain. I always say I'm a Hinchcliffe man, but actually, when I look back, I'm very much a Graham Williams era man as well, because this is when I really remember watching them. Although I'd say a lot of the better stuff is because of the influence of Hinchcliffe, but that's for another time. But Power of Kroll, not as well loved as other Robert Holmes adventures.
Well, hello. I hope you're very well today. The date is immaterial. This is a podcast in time and space, and I don't want to limit us by confining us to one small period of the 21st century Earth. But it could. I do not swear. I try not to swear in these podcasts because I'm talking about Doctor Who, and it would seem wrong. It would be like getting drunk with Tinky Winky, or get smacked up with Captain Pugwash, or or any other inappropriate things with children's entertainers. It'd be like, we'll leave it at that. Taking drugs with Zamo Maguire. Oh, hang on. But listen. The washing. I've just changed the fuse in the plug because I thought the washing machine seemed to blow a fuse. It hasn't blown a fuse. It's blown itself. It's died. So washing machine's died. Tax bill in today. TV program started last night that's had excellent reviews that I was up for a part. In fact, I had a part that the writer told me had written with my voice in mind, and then when I auditioned for it, I didn't get it. So that's just been on. And today I got an email telling me that the job I thought I kind of hoped I was going to be doing, and it'd been kind of hinted that I was. I got a lovely email telling me all the reasons they liked the last bit of work I did for them, and then just a tiny little part of the email saying that they weren't actually going to be asking me to do anything on the latest batch that they're doing. So today, without swearing, is a bell end, and I've taken the dog for a walk to try and get some fresh air, clear my head. That is good medicine. I've also been a bit self-indulgent, what this isn't, by eating a cookie, a warm cookie with ice cream and squirty cream, which not normally things that aren't really good for me. But do you know what? Neither of those things really hits. Do you know what is going to make me feel better today? Not an awful lot. It's a really rotten day. Do you know what's going to make me feel better today, everybody? Watching a story that wasn't even on my timetable. I sort of do I do a sort of vague plan just so that I mix the doctors up fairly and perhaps mix styles and all that sort of thing. Although even then I released 2 Michael Ferguson directed stories in a row because I'm an idiot. But this wasn't even on the list. And dear old Ian, I think, recorded this ages ago, so I wonder if his projects that he can't talk about have been out and gone. I don't know. If Ian, when you hear me, tweet and we'll retweet on the back of it. What's going to make me feel much better than fresh air of the park and gallivanting out with my dog and the lovely sugar rush of unctuous warm cookies and beautifully melting silky ice cream is The Power of Kroll, and I don't care. That's what I want to do. That's what I want to watch. So, and just to prove how well today is going, I'm looking at the monitoring levels on my audio recording, and they're fantastic. Had I actually pressed record, so there's going to be a slight change because fortunately I have a video backup. So that audio is from that, and I'm now going to change and press record on the audio, which will mean there's now an increase in quality. So, right, I'm going to watch The Power of Kroll. What could possibly go wrong? Let's. I've got it lined up on BritBox. I'm going to press play in 3, 2. Oh, don't fade. 3, 2, 1. Even BritBox was getting bored of me. It started to fade to black. Right, it's The Power of Kroll. I think this is probably the last Key to Time story I saw, because always had a bit of a bad reputation. It was the last one Robert Holmes did for years. Nobody really had much that was nice to say about The Power of Kroll. And as we'll discover, not many people lived to tell the tale either, or made themselves known. And I've always had a bit of a soft spot for it, except then when I did it for Running Through Corridors, which is the last time I saw it, I actually found a lot of the seeds of these men sitting back being cross with each other rather tedious, which surprised me because I quite like men sitting in a room yelling at each other. That's my idea of drama. I like this. I like this setup here because I believe these people know each other, and I just little things like Harg's throwaway line to Thorne, who's brought him his whatever it is, his space books, saying, "How much do I owe you?" The idea that you bring somebody that in real life, in real worlds, if somebody brings you something, it's going to have cost them. And this is a nice bit of plotting. We've got the mystery early on of who's followed Thorne down in his ship. But yeah, as I say, the first time I watched this, I liked all of this stuff. But when I did it through Running Through Corridors, I got a bit. I found this the later scenes with these guys a bit tedious, which surprises me because, as I say, character actors yelling at each other in a room is my kind of thing. Business is a. You're a bastard, but I'm going to sell the business. That's my kind of thing. I mean, even Succession now is you're a bastard. I'm related to you. I'm going to sell the business. That to me is drama. I'm not very ambitious, but this sets up. Obviously, there's a parallel here with politics and also literature. Last of the Mohicans casts a big shadow over this, and not least because it's got two of the cast, Philip Maddock here, looking furious. And John Abernethy essentially playing the same part that he played in Last of the Mohicans, for which he got an Emmy nomination. But I'm sure we'll talk about that. I'm sure I'll talk about John Abernethy a lot because he's an actor I talk about a lot. I love Philip Maddock's look here. Philip Maddock does so much with this part. Philip Maddock's performance is an object lesson or an object example of getting a fantastic actor and illustrating exactly what value they bring to something that is on the page. And I like the sort of slightly embellished story that he thought he was playing Thorne, then when he turned up he wasn't playing Thorne. I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that. I think he was offered Thorne, and then that offer was taken away because Neil McCarthy accepted. I think, I like Neil McCarthy, and I think he's brilliant as Barnum in The Mind of Evil. But I think if you get Maddock, you take Maddock. And then Alan Browning was supposed to be playing Fenner. You've got to admire Norman Stewart's casting. I have to say, Norman Stewart had been a production assistant, and actually after being a director went back to being a production assistant. That's a really interesting yo-yo that I'm not sure has been repeated with Doctor Who director, and he was a hugely respected production assistant, so the natural progression is to then be promoted to be a director, and he did Underworld and The Power of Kroll. He does the Omega Factor as well, doesn't he? And then he goes, I think I'll be a production assistant again. We don't even know. We think he's dead. Phil Newman did get a taped interview with him. He was a Canadian fellow, and he was in sort of Aberdeen or somewhere, but the trail has gone dry. But I think his story would be an interesting one to tell. But because I think he was a respected production assistant, his casts, I remember getting the Doctor Who magazine and reading the cast lists of the Norman Stewart stories and going, even in the small parts, you've got people like Frank Jarvis and Richard Shaw, actors. He seemed to like to use actors who'd been in Doctor Who before, which immediately made him appeal to me. But he gets really good actors. Interestingly, though, that's sometimes not enough. And in fact, his stories, I mean, thinking Underworld as well, where you have a cast that on paper is really strong looking, and then you come away from it and go, oh, what went wrong with everybody? So sometimes there's a weird sort of alchemy that either happens or doesn't. And it's not necessarily because people are happy or unhappy, because if we're led to believe it, Philip Maddock was unhappy on this, and I think he's the best thing in it. But I equally don't buy that. Oh, he's playing the part pissed off because he is pissed off. He's a better actor than that. Do you know what I mean? It's like saying, oh, he was a bit cold, so he played the part cold because it was all. I mean, come on. And nobody is in a bad mood for 4 weeks based on it. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a nice thing that we've added to it. Maybe that was his impetus for playing the part. But actually, I think it's really interesting when we look at some of the later scenes how him being furious actually gives the scenes the drama that they need. So whether he was annoyed or not because of the way that his casting had come about, what he's doing is a really good acting choice. And also this stuff on film is obviously much earlier than the stuff that we get to later on where he's particularly furious, but actually giving life to the thing. But I love this marshy setting. This is a really unusual setting for Doctor Who. The swamp is being green is really, really interesting. And then you've got Glenn Owen here, who later became famous to sort of viewers of my generation. He'd been around, of course, he'd been in The Brothers and lots of other stuff. But he was Jack Rolfe in Howard's Way, who was the sort of character that would take a slug of whiskey and then say something cross. And I like the sorts of... I mean, sort of, he would have been very happy in the control room of Delta Magna. You know, oh, you're a bastard and there's a squid and I'm going to buy the squid. It's that kind of... you shot the wrong man's hat is nice. But look at that sort of reedy, pampas grassy sort of stuff. That is very unusual. And of course it's convincing because it's real backdrop for a Doctor Who story. I think setting a Doctor Who story in a marsh is a lovely idea. Got a brilliant cast on paper. Robert Holmes is a fantastic writer, and I think he's laying out the story beats and the characters very, very well. So we know that the Swampies are there and that they're a potential threat and that these guys don't like them, but it's not political to just wipe them out. They have to sort of pay lip service to living in harmony, even though they've displaced these people and they don't like them. The Doctor brilliantly comes in. I love the way that the Doctor behaves with these sort of scumbags, actually. And then we've got a whole different thing going on in Swampyland where the actors are rising above the cliched natures of their characters. Now, Robert Holmes was a very clever writer, so is the cliche part of the joke? Is this whole thing a bit of a joke? And if it is, I think it kind of works. He's had to watch the sort of rather patronising, and he's not afraid to use that stuff either, but the patronising way that indigenous peoples are treated in dramas of this kind. And yet I think he actually does some quite interesting stuff with it, and I think the actors are sort of in on the joke, which I think makes all the swampy stuff perhaps slightly better than we often than we might necessarily allow it to be if we just take what's going on the surface, which is, an actor painted green prostrating himself at a badly composited model shot. I think there's a lot more going on, and we will see The Irish accent's an interesting choice. It's a sort of shorthand for roguish gun runner. It's a bit Caves Vandrazani, though, isn't it? It's that he's running guns to the swampies, but actually it's his ship that's come in behind Thorn. So although Thorn is acting slightly suspicious and allows Fenner to shoot somebody that isn't Rome Dutt, it's Thorn that's sort of got Rome Dutt to supply the swampies with, turns out, knackered weapons in order to give him an excuse to exterminate them, which is excellent sort of plotting, really. It's a good... It all makes sense within the setup that has been very economically wrought, because we've got a refining plant with 4 people in it and a tribe of swampies with 3 of whom talk, and then this sort of shady gud runner guy liaising between the two. Tom Baker sort of falling. I know he's just been pushed, but that's a great edge. You can tell he probably said to Neil McCarthy, "Wouldn't it be witty if you pushed me?" And I sort of fell in. But it's a great way, because you open the scene with the Doctor sort of bowling in like a sort of ball of crazy energy, and I think he's wonderfully obtuse in all of this stuff. He's got, he's so patronising about the methane catalyzer. It's like, these big beefy bully guys, and he's just like, I've seen loads of these things, but behind that sort of cheeky, slightly schoolboy anarchy obtuseness that he has, and that smile, he's got a, I'll use Rob Shearman's phrase again, the sort of the quiet danger, but I love the way he doesn't even look at the thing. He's like, that's a thing. The Doctor's fierce intelligence, and fierce in both senses of the word, and the sort of very dismissive way that he runs rings around their primitive technology, and Maddock is equal to it, which I really like. I mean, his line was something like, "Yes, that's brilliant." Now, the way that Haag does it is to go, "Oh, that's brilliant," but then Maddock follows it up, and on the page is, "Yes, that's brilliant." It's just a backup. He turns it into a sort of quiet threat, a kind of, "What the hell are you up to?" That sort of purred menace for what is essentially sort of not even exposition, just sort of, re-emphasising the Doctor's brilliance. But he's made Fenner take it as a sign of danger, and it's just adding layers to the performance there, adding layers to the drama and to the interaction and to what the Doctor means to these characters beyond what they're all saying to each other. I think Maddock is so good in this. And I remember when I read the book going, he plays that part? Because that's just sort of like second in command. He does it, again, on the page, is not even that cross. I think John Abernethy is also superb. I mean, managing to retain his dignity whilst painted green with a sort of fraying balaclava for hair is, I think, takes great, and the absolute, and it's actually a very funny performance, but the reason it works is because it's a funny performance played absolutely straight. I think John Abernethy is totally in on the joke, and this is brilliant stuff, because everyone treats the Swampies as though they're idiots, but Ranquin there going, "What, you need our signature because the Sons of Earth don't trust you? I've got your number, pal, but I am being absolutely polite with you. We're not sort of staccato, monosyllabic savages that these characters can often be. Ranquin is a wily operator, and that is a sort of, that is a real dig at Rome Dutt, but he's still, because he's a politician, essentially, he may be green and wearing a loincloth, but as we will discover with Ranquin, he's a politician. What the hell is Tom Baker doing there? He's just been given a drink, and he's put it in his pocket. That, to me, is a sign that Tom Baker is going, I don't think this director's massively in control of this set. And I suspect the producer has just read the scripts for the Armageddon Factor and is crying. So I'm going to put this drink in my pocket and see if anybody stops me. And of course, nobody will. And he's also referred to the, and I didn't mention the, on the hovercraft, there's another guy who we never see indoors, because, of course, he's only on film. But they have referred to... I'm pleased that they refer to it there, because they says there's 6 of us. There's 5 of us. The Doctor goes 6. So they go, no, because he's not counting Mensch, because they're essentially racist. But by 5, he means these 4 here, and the guy who drives the hovercraft, who never comes indoors. We never find out what happens to him. He doesn't even get a name, so... Trevor Hovercraft is obviously just stays and tends to his hovercraft, and I want to be alone with my hovercraft. I'm not coming in and watching the Bagule on the telly. But we never know what happens to Trevor Hovercraft. Is Bagule a word, or is that just a Robert Holmes thing saying, well, I need to call it something. Bay is not exciting enough. Area of the swamp is too much of a matter. Bagule. You kind of know what they're talking about, and this is great. And in fact, from what we know of later on, is that Fenner is the sort of survivor. He's not very nice here. He actually becomes the sort of the voice of reason by the end of it. But I love the way that the Doctor absolutely does not stand for their horribleness, but he doesn't. Now is not the time for righteous indignation. Now the time is to undercut that with a sort of sense of humour and a sort of, childlike quizzicalness that masks, intense disapproval. It's the Doctor saying one thing, meaning another. It's so it means it's really interesting to watch. The delivery is fun and exciting, but also it speaks to how these characters are interacting, and the Doctor saying one thing but really meaning another. I think that all works really well. I think it all works really nicely. And to top it off, we have night filming, which looks fantastic. This is brilliant. But I mean, this is King Kong, and that's interesting, isn't it? How this mere act of painting them green somehow makes this slightly less problematic than it could be. If you're watching, King Kong or something like that, we know, and if you were to make one of those dramas from days gone by in relatively recent history, and you'd hired a load of actors of colour, well, it's difficult, because you could then be said, well, we're giving 3 nice speaking roles to black actors who aren't seen enough. So it's very complicated, actually, because that would have been a good, there'd be certain black actors who don't get a look in with Doctor Who going, right, we've got some decent speaking parts, and then down the line they'd probably have to go, but isn't it typical that it had to be those sorts of parts? But instead it's gone, well, actually that's a bit too stereotypical to create the characters that everyone calls savages. Now we know they're called savages by bad characters, but to make those actors of colour, that would be a bit dodgy. To have them dancing and doing the sort of grass-skirted ritual to the squid thing, that I think that would make this much less of a comfortable watch now. Of course it would. So they somehow get away with still making that sort of depiction, but painting them green. It somehow makes it slightly more palatable, even though all of the same sort of things are going on. But as I say, I think it's interesting. I think that the depiction of the swamp is there's some horrible language used, but that is used by not very nice people who are, the story is completely making the point that moving these people off Delta Magna to the moon of Delta Magna was pretty horrible, and now that they're inconvenient here to do a sort of act of subterfuge in order to make them seem like they're the attackers, which gives us an excuse to wipe them out. That's all. That's all. It's clear who the bad guys are, and ain't the swampies. You know what I mean? Now, Ranquin is an idiot, but he's not an idiot because he's a primitive savage, to use the vernacular. He's and he's actually quite a wily idiot. He's almost, you know, we've seen that being a bit of an unpleasant half-wit is no bar to political power, and actually being a wily political operator, you can be one of those things whilst not being terribly bright. But also Ranquin as a religious manipulator is another really interesting thing. He's almost like a sort of televangelist, and there's got some great stuff later on, which we'll get to in the later episodes. So I think there's some really, really interesting stuff going on. I mean, Mensch, Terry Walsh has had to deliver a line recently, and it's never the most edifying of experiences, because and you know, eagle-eyed viewers will know that Mensch being played by Terry Walsh means you're half surprised he hasn't gone out onto a ledge and fallen off it, but he's gonna be toast next week. But this adds another layer. I don't quite know why the Doctor keeps being able... It's about 3 times, isn't it, that he's walked out of the room where he's supposedly being held and managed to make a getaway. And they stopped him once and said, come back with us, and then he just buggered off again. But I love this night shooting. I love the canoes and the water and the reeds and all of that. As I say, I think the swampies are more interesting than they need to be. And the episode is going to end on a joke that isn't paid off till next week. So I think Power of Kroll is often sort of criticised for being dull. I think there's lots of interesting things going on. I think there's lots of things that work better than they should. A lot of things that don't work as well as they should. And a lot of things that either work or don't work, and I'm not sure whether they work or don't work by accident or by design. As I say, I think the pitching of the sort of whole swampy thing is actually much better than it should be. And I don't know if that's because Robert Holmes was so good and the actors managed to pick up on that, or whether actually Robert Holmes is writing slightly substandard and the actors make it work by the level that they pitched. I don't know. And Abernethy had played Chingachgook in Last of the Mohicans, and later went on to play Herne the Hunter. So he kind of specialises in playing sort of deep-voiced deliverers of litanies and all of that. And I was very pleased because I'm a big fan of John Abernethy. He's a running theme in Moths Ate My Doctor Who scarf, my one-man show. So I'm delighted that, Romana gets threatened by another man in a terrible monster costume in Doctor Who, which turns out to be a joke, that the close-up for the cliffhanger is given to John Abernethy, and I had a sneaking suspicion he might be credited before Maddock, which I was thrilled about, because it would be predictable for Philip Maddock to get high billing, but then you still sort of think, so they got Philip Maddock and he gets third billing. This is the Warlord, this is Mahendri Solon, this is he was Margwa in Last of the Mohicans. I mean, this is and anyway, lucky to have Philip Maddock in a story that I think so far has thrown up lots of really interesting things and has yet to sort of become the problematic, whether it's dreary or anomalous or whatever the problem it has within the Key to Time season. It's certainly, I think, the story that is of the Key to Time season, which I think of as slightly sort of fairy tale-esque, with its androids of Tara, with its swords and fighting and Stones of Blood is a bit sort of dark and low-key and hammery and just the other stories seem a bit more sort of fairy tale. Even Pirate Planet, which is to all intents and purposes sci-fi, is slightly sci-fi once removed, because it's got the sort of fantastical comedic Douglas Adams things going on. This story of them all in as a fan whose earliest memories are, I think, repeats of Invisible Enemy. But I remember them repeating the Pirate Planet. I remember watching the Pirate Planet quite vividly, but I don't remember the rest of season 16. So I think it was a repeat of Pirate Planet that I remember. But so I sort of discovered, I watched the Key to Time stories in retrospect. My earliest memories of on broadcast first time of season 17, really. This seemed to me like the story that was most like Doctor Who. Do you know what I mean? The Doctor Who of my imagination. So as I say, I was always quite surprised when I read about it, and it was kind of like, oh no, it's not that much cop. What am I going to choose as my favourite thing of episode 1? I think I have to get in there early. And I think because it is the most, if you come to it sort of blind, that the most striking thing is just how good Philip Maddock is in a crap part, and just how he is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in those scenes. As I say, I like Neil McCarthy, but I don't think he's does anything particularly special in this. And I will talk about the other actors in the refinery in later episodes, I'm sure. But he's got broad shoulders in this story, Maddock, and there are so many bits when you go, oh, that's really interesting, and then you think about what it is in the script that he's been asked to do, and sometimes it's nothing at all, and sometimes it's a very short line, and he gives it so much well. And credit to Tom Baker as well, I think, who's as I say, sort of slightly obtuse schoolboy undermining of everything that's going on in the refinery, shows just what value he is as a doctor. And yeah, I like the swamp, and I like the night scenes, and I like all of that, and we might come to those things later on. But I think the thing that strikes me the most, and that will continue to make its presence felt. So it means he might choose it for a later episode, but because I've chosen it for episode 1, that still counts for me. I'm going to choose Philip Maddock playing Fenner. Whereas my normal reaction would be to go, well, we take the famous actor for granted. I'm not going to choose him because it's obvious he should be good. And it is, to me, obvious that Philip Maddock will be good. And he's brilliant in Brain and Morbius and brilliant in the War Games. But I wonder if I'll choose him in either of those things because I sort of almost expect it. Whereas here, he's sort of above and beyond the call of duty. And he certainly should. The art lies not in the fact that he is here. It's in the fact that he really shouldn't be here at all. And yet is still firing on all cylinders. Philip Maddock, I love your acting. Especially when you're giving above and beyond the call of duty. Love it.
So starting off with episode 1, I would say the hovercraft. Absolutely love hovercrafts. They're very much part of my childhood, in that the only time we went abroad until I was 16 was to Calais via a hovercraft. And I think it was not long after The Power of Kroll, so I felt like I was in the future. But yeah, absolutely love the hovercrafts zipping around. They're jetpacks for things we will have in the future, but that are possible.
That's actually a good choice because you don't see many hovercrafts in Doctor Who. I think of there's one in the Sea Devils, and there's the superb one in Planet of the Spiders that runs over Stuart Fell. But it is, and of course at the time that was a kind of thing. That must have been great for the production team to go, we've got a hovercraft. Trevor insists on driving it though. He's a terrible actor though, so don't give him any line. He won't travel to the studio. I'm surprised. I'm sad that Ian didn't mention the hovercraft and its driver, Trevor. It's one of those great that it's one of the things that you would do at Doctor Who in the 70s is go, we've got a thing and we can use a thing, and that's actually enough to sort of separate a story from what surrounds it. Well, we've got a hovercraft in it this week, and that does add to the whole, I think, uniqueness of this particular setting. That I think is so much part of the character of The Power of Kroll that isn't talked about enough, actually, because I think the setting, some settings that are unique can be a bit dreary, but actually I think the swamp is refreshing, and of course it's very convincing. It's convincing locale that makes sense within the plot, and throw a hovercraft on it because of course the methane gatherers would have hovercraft in order to do, any maintenance and scooting about. And so, yeah, good call, the hovercraft. But I've got Philip Maddock in the bank because I've got a feeling he's going to get mentioned at some point. And the rules are I have to choose a thing per episode. My friend has to choose a thing per episode, and they choose a bonus thing at the end. And if they choose something in episode 1, I can't choose it in later episodes. So that is gone to me. If we both choose the same thing for episode 1, yes, I get a point because I've chosen the same thing as them. However, if I choose a thing in episode 1 that they choose later, I still get a point for that. However, that then rebounds upon me because it means obviously I won't get the point for the thing that I've chosen in episode 4. If I choose Philip Maddock in episode 4, yeah, I get the point, but I get the point counted against episode 1. But whatever I choose for episode 4, I don't know, Philip Bird's ears, I won't get a point for that because obviously he's chosen Philip Maddock. So it's a double-edged sword, or not terribly exciting scoring system. You decide. But I'm good. The power of Kroll has done me the power of good, and I hope it has you too. I hope you've come to this going, power of Kroll's a load of rubbish, and that this makes you go back to it going, actually, why don't I give the power of Kroll a chance? Because if I achieve nothing else today, it's to give the power of love to the power of Kroll. It's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you so very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock. My special guest watching The Power of Kroll is Ian Winterton. He can be found on Twitter. He makes it easy, at Ian Winterton, capital I, capital W. And his website is ianwinterton.co.uk, so check him out. I would also like to thank the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Luke Adkins, Peter Adamson, Kevin Ashelford, Will Brooks, Rick Byatt, Robin Bland, Alex Kafajoglu, Paul Carnahan, Andy Case, John Curley, Mark Dakin, John Elledge, Gary Gillett, James Gould, Lisa C. Greco, David Green, Dave Hoskin, Jessica Jones, Andrew Jordan, Ashley Knight, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Gavin McLean, Nathan Martin, and David Matthewman. The music for these podcasts is specially composed by David Gates, and the podcast artwork is by Dylan Patterson. Well, if you would like to join their number, you can go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock. What's there? There's gold in them there hills. If by gold I mean pictures of my dog, which have proved more popular than I think anything I have done, and I only put them there for ribaldry, really. But if you actually like this sort of content, there are advance releases. The Happy Times and Places releases are getting up to about 5 months earlier than they come out on iTunes for patrons. There are also exclusive releases and bonus material as well. And there's usually 3 or 4 posts per week, although one of those is of the dog, so I'm not sure that counts. But there's usually something comes out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's on the patreon.com. If you can't or don't want to commit to the monthly schedule of Patreon, which, by the way, starts for as little as £3 a month and gets you access to most things, and you get a 10% discount off that and indeed any tier if you sign up for a year in advance. But yeah, if you can't or don't want to do that, there's ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock, where you can just chuck me some silver into my hat whenever you're feeling flush, or I do something that you particularly enjoy, or I sound particularly needy, hungry, or sad, which is frankly how I feel most of the time, but I'm very good at disguising it with arcana and joie de oeuvre. Is that a new phrase? Joie de oeuvre. That's full of the joys of Doctor Who. So yeah, look, but I also know that life is not exactly a bed of roses at the moment for anybody financially. So
what costs you nothing is to go to iTunes and give these 5 stars. That really helps to separate Toby Hiddick's Time Travels from the very crowded dance floor where there's lots of Doctor Who podcasts jigging about, vying for attention, and some very fine ones too. And also a couple of lines of review to go with your 5-star rating. That would really help on iTunes, or in fact wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm also a stand-up comedian and can be found online on the first Sunday of every month on twitch.tv/excess malarkey at 8 p.m. UK time. That's me with 4 comedians from around the world doing a sort of online comedy show, which is the online manifestation of the live show that I do every Tuesday. We had to go online during the lockdown, and we carried on. We persisted when we should have been on stage but couldn't be, and got an online following as a result, which is why we continue with the online thing, but only once a month, because we're back weekly on stage in Manchester, 8 p.m. UK time, at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club at the Breadshed, which is, again, me and 4 or 5 comedians from the national circuit doing our bit and charging as little money as possible for so doing. Actually, the online version, there's no onus to pay at all if you can't or don't want to. It's free at the point of entry on that Twitch show. And also, when the show is not on, there is an archive up there of past performances and lots of the silly things that we got up to try and make the world a better place as it was decaying under the plague. So that's what I do when I'm not rabbiting on about Doctor Who. So if you can't get enough of these dulcet tones, turn up on a Tuesday if you're in the vicinity of Manchester, or first Sunday of every month if you're in the vicinity of the whole world. So there's no excuse. Well, there we go. I quite like Joie de Houvre. I wish I'd snuck that in to the main attraction. Maybe I've peaked. Maybe that's it now. We'll call an end to the post-credit stuff, because now I'll get loads of people going, it wasn't that good, mate. And then you get other people going, I was there for the Joie de Houvre. It's been downhill ever since. It's not my Houvre. Anyway, I'm going to go and hoover up some supper, and I will speak to you next time.